On this episode of the Sacred Playgrounds podcast, we've got some findings to share from our OMC Director Survey. We're going to share some things that are a little bit more and some things that are a little bit less as we go through these 7 key findings from that survey. Welcome to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast, where we turn numbers into stories and data into insights. We dive deep into theology and research, paired with practical wisdom and action steps to help camping ministries thrive. I'm your host and producer, Jared Rendell, a camp enthusiast and part of the Sacred Playgrounds team. This podcast features Dr. Jake Sorensen, a scholar, author, practitioner, and the founder of Sacred Playgrounds. Be sure to subscribe, submit a question to us to be featured on the podcast, and click that support button to help make these episodes happen. Find us on Facebook and Instagram at Sacred Playgrounds or at sacredplaygrounds.com. Wonder with us what God might have in store at your sacred playground. Hey, welcome to the playground, everyone. It's data day, Jake. It always feels like that after there's like a big survey comes out and we've got all this fun data to share.
It's funny. Every day feels like data day for me.
Every day
I don't
is
know. It feels like
day-to-day
I'm
for you.
always just drowning in it and swimming through it. So it's fun to actually come up for air and say, oh, right, some of these things actually have practical uses in the real world. So that's
They
good.
do, which is always the goal, right? I mean, we say that regularly. We haven't done a single report in our lives for the sake of data, right? It's not data for the
Absolutely.
sake of data. You know, like we choose projects are often action research projects, right? Or they are tied clearly with conversations and consulting and action steps. And we've got, framework for all that. And so it's meant to do stuff, whether that's an individual camp or things like this, right? Things like this bigger data that spans all of, at least in this case, with what we're sharing today, the Outdoor Ministries connection. So that's the plan, everyone. I'll run you through that in a second. But I am a little sad for you that you can't see Jake's new hat right now, which is great. All right, so I'll try to at least share a screenshot or something. Jake's currently wearing a hat that says "Camp Hair, Don't Care," that he got at a trip this last week. You've been at camp like a ton.
I've been at
We'll
camp.
get to
Yeah,
maybe
like
in a little bit.
I was on the road, five different beds and 5 different nights, 6 different groups of camp leaders doing training retreats and diving into some data and partnering with congregations. So it's been fun. I get energized by things like that. People say, "Oh, that must be so exhausting," and I was like, "Well, actually,
Well, I'm a
I was
weirdo
having
ultra
I was having
extrovert
some fun." Yeah.
and you get some swag sometimes. So camp hair, don't care.
Thanks to our friends
We'll make sure
from
you get a screenshot of that.
Camp Horizon in Kansas.
Shout out. Thanks, Horizon. Jake appreciates the swag. All right. So here's the plan. We are going to go through. So the OMC Director Survey, right? So it spans. We'll just talk you through the survey real quick. So this is a survey of the primary leader at camp, the executive director, the CEO, the site director, whatever the context exactly might be. But this is a survey of those typically kind of those primary directors, and it spans a lot of things. So we're going to hit a lot of those quick today, right? It talks about camper things, it talks about staff things, it talks about those directors themselves. So we've got some things to share about that. The full survey will be out soon, where you'll be able to just see that publicly. We are finishing through that. We've sent, if you're listening and you're one of those association directors, they've got some of that initial data. We'll share some of that today, and then the full survey will be out soon. But we wanted to take this chance now, kind of in podcast season still here, to share some of these findings because they're interesting. And so seeing some of these trends is great. So that's where this comes from. So this is from the Outdoor Ministries Connection. You learn more about what that is if you're curious. It is an association of associations, really, that spans a handful of mostly the kind of mainline camp associations. So you can learn more about that. I'll drop the link to the OMC website and the Great Gathering and stuff like that in the show notes so people can learn more about OMC. So that's who took this survey. That's where these findings are coming from. Jake, other things that you want to share about the survey overall?
Yeah. I mean, we've been doing this for a number of years. This was one of the first major surveys of camps we did back in 2014 as kind of part of the confirmation project way back then. And this is something that the Outdoor Ministries Connection has said, this is something we want to lean into together, do some of this research stuff together. And so they've continued to sponsor this survey every 2 years. And so we've got data going back now 11 years, which is really exciting to be able to see
Yeah, it
some of
is.
these trends over time. And so that's why, as we frame this, what are some things that are going up? What are some things that are going down? And what are some things that are kind of staying the same? So, and some of you that have listened in the past, as we talk about, what are the number one concerns of camp directors? We know it's participant safety. We know that from this survey. And spoiler alert, we learned that again this year. Their number one concern is participant safety, followed by fellowship and community building, followed by character formation and self confidence, followed by fun, and then by experiences of God and facilitating those experiences of God and individual faith
Hmm.
formation. So, all those things that we've emphasized in the past about priorities to camp directors
Hmm.
comes from this survey.
Yeah, that's a good point. 248 outdoor ministry organizations responded to this survey, and that correlates to even 300 because there's some multi-sites. That's 306 sites. That's a lot of respondents, a lot of data. That represents 49 US states, 9 Canadian provinces and territories. That just tells you a bit about the breadth and the span of this, which is part of what makes good data, right? When it is deep and when it's wide, that makes good data that can tell you things and you can learn from and you can do things from. Like
Absolutely.
Jake was alluding to, we so here's how we're gonna frame this up. You saw the title, hopefully, and it says more or less. And so we're gonna share some things that we've seen go up, go increase, be a little bit more, and some things that we've seen decrease, go down, be a little bit less, and some things that are maybe right in the middle there, and what that means. We're gonna talk about maybe some why and what that means for each of these pieces. That's the plan. Before we do that, we're gonna do our quick camp question.
Quick Ham question.
All right, Jake, we talked about how you've been to camp a lot this week. And the truth is, between this work and, just the rest of our lives, we've been to a lot of camps. We've been to a lot of sites. And so I'm curious if you would share maybe one of the most interesting, share something about one of the most interesting sites that you've been to.
Yeah. Wow. So I get to travel around to lots of different sites and see some really cool things. So it's hard to pick which site is so cool, but some of the ones that are front of mind are the ones that I was at this week, and there was one that really stands out in terms of the uniqueness of the site and how it came to be and things like that. And this was New Life Ranch in Oklahoma. And so this is their second site. So they have a very large site about an hour away from the one that I was at. And so they've got the valley and they've got the cove. The valley is their first site. And they were expanding beyond that. They knew they needed another site. So they were looking at, do we purchase land and then build? Do we try to come up with, a site that's already there?
Sure.
What they ended up getting a hold of was this amazing site that had been a church group, a large church, mega church, had constructed this site as a ministry. And one of the big ministries that they did was something called this Christmas train thing. And so every Christmas, there'd be 12 days where people would come and it was a steam train that they would take around the camp property. And they built up this
Wow.
site with this steam train and all this Christmas village sort of stuff. And so they did up the entire town like an old West town, right? With all the false fronts and the storefronts. And they've got the OK Corral and they've got the Palace Hotel. And they pulled these out of Western movies. So
Yeah,
people
they
that are
did.
familiar with Westerns, you'd walk down the streets of this frontier town and you'd recognize a bunch of the buildings, not just the name, but actually the style and the front of the building inspired by the movies. And so it was this highly developed site for this, very intentional ministry that they were doing at Christmas time. And it became very carnival-esque, of course, and because of the train and everything like that and the storefronts. And so as Frontier or as New Life Ranch, Frontier Cove is the name of the property. As they looked to purchase it, they were like, how can we repurpose this for our ministries? Because one of the things that they noted, so I was walking around with Tom, the director, and he was telling me about how they started to recampify this place. Because it's campy in a lot of ways, but it's also very touristy. So there were fences everywhere and
Sure.
concrete everywhere.
Yeah.
So they've been ripping up concrete areas and putting in grass. And they've been pulling up fences so that the kids
Sure.
can cross different
Sure.
places and changing things from kind of front facing things to circles where they can gather around the campfire, things like that. But a lot of the cool things were already in place. So the kids get to stay in these frontier town type places and do some fun things in these different buildings. And so just a really cool way that this old vision that this one church had was able to be repurposed and made into a camp. And now they've had it for about 7 years, and now they're kind of recampifying it and taking their philosophy of ministry, wanting these kids to have this experience in open green spaces, and trying to redo the site a little bit, this highly developed site, so that it feels more campy. There's some cool trails out there, and they got horses. I went for a run on one of the trails, and I had a pretty close encounter with a skunk. I'm happy to report that I did not need to take a tomato bath. I was not sprayed, but I was within 10 yards of this guy, and I was like, all right, I'm going to go this way. And I was able to.
That would have been an interesting plane ride for your seat neighbors there, buddy.
It would have been an interesting plane ride if I had been sitting next to somebody. But it's always fun to have close encounters with nature, especially when you come out unscathed, or in this case, unsprayed. So that's the one that's kind of top of mind as I think about just the really unique and interesting site layout and the experience that they're able to have, but also like, how can we redo this site so that we can, so it aligns more with our philosophy of small group ministry, of interacting with nature.
All right. We have more or less things to dive into, so we're going to get going. Jake or I will share kind of a headline from one of these findings. Of course, there's going to be a handful of data and numbers that we're going to throw around today, but there'll be kind of a headline about, is this a little more? Is this a little less? Jake, ready to dive in?
Absolutely.
Start us off.
All right. So one of the really cool things that I see in this survey, and it's sort of a theme, is that stress and burnout among our directors is down. And that feels so good. Coming out of the pandemic, there was a lot of stress. How are we going to keep our ministries going? How are we going to pay the bills? How are we going to get campers to come back? Do we need to drastically change our programs? Do we need to offer virtual camp all the time now, online stuff? What are we going to do with cell phones? Like, there was all sorts of stress. There was a lot of burnout that we recorded in the 2022-2023 survey. And
right. We talked
people
about that a lot.
Were ready to leave their position, and there was a lot of transience in those years in 2022 and 2023 of people that were just ready to move on because of that. As we asked about their state of being in 2022, fewer than half of them said that they either felt kind of fresh or they felt energized, and a lot of them felt burnt out or exhausted or drained. So in fact, there were more that reported being exhausted or burnt out than those that reported being invigorated or energized in 2022.
That's right.
And it was totally opposite in 2024. So we really see a positive trend. And so it was 60% of them said they felt either fresh or invigorated and energized. And only 7% said burnt out this year. So it's really cool to see those numbers flipped and to see a lot of folks feeling kind of energized about their work. We saw some mobility in the past few years, and that's kind of part of it, right? So people that were really burnt out were able to move on, and now new folks are in, or people got through that time of burnout. And we see the reasons for that. So something like staffing, that was the number one concern in 2022. That was really stressful. It was well over half of our ministries said that they were understaffed, especially in the summer, and that was causing a lot of stress on them. And this year, that number was way down in terms of the numbers that were understaffed and severely understaffed. But the ones that were looking for full-time positions, there's a lot fewer vacancies in those positions. We know that can cause stress in directors, and then the finances as well. So we see positive trends in a lot of these things, and cumulatively, what we see in the responses is that their overall stress and anxiety, the burnout, is down among directors. And I would see that as something very positive.
Yeah, that's good news. Yeah, that's good news for sure. Awesome. All right, let's move on. There is more. There's a second one. We've seen more. We've seen an increase in involvement among clergy at camp from 2022 to 2024. So in 2022, 42% of these camps were reporting that clergy were at a high or very high level of involvement. And we'll talk about some of those ways in a second here. So that was at 42%. We saw an 8% jump in that in 2024, in this last year. So over the last couple of years, we've seen an 8-point jump, which is not nothing in terms of clergy involvement. We talk a lot about the value of partnerships there. One of the things that makes those partnerships work is when clergy are able to personally experience. We wrote about it in the article a little bit last week again too, is one of the things people can offer church leaders. I'll put that in the show notes. Prior to camp is space to come and personally experience things. And their level of ownership and partnership in the ministry goes way up when we've created space for them, right? And so we saw that camps, you're doing it, you're figuring that out. We saw an 8% jump in that from 42% to, in 2024, 50% of camps reported moderately high or very high clergy involvement. So that was a jump. Some of the things that they are doing are things like, and we'll see this in the report, they're leading or participating in staff training sessions. That's the highest one at 61% of those. That's the way that they're having clergy get involved. They're leading worship services with campers or guests. Jake, this next one was interesting because we saw an increase in this, which we thought positive. This is this bit about their availability with summer staff. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so that jumped in 2024-25 from the 2022 level, and this is when we have a clergy member there to minister to the summer staff, either as a formal chaplain or just kind of there on call, so that they can answer questions about stress, anxiety, but also call story and things like that. So it's a really valuable opportunity for the summer staff members, and it's a way to care for our summer staff members. And so that was under 50% in 2022, and so it was only at 47%. We saw that jump to over 50, so to 55%. So that was a nice healthy jump from 2022 to 2024. And again, that's a way for us to care for these young adult summer staff members that are in our care.
Yeah. Okay. So when we look at data, this idea of like increase or decrease is something that we look for. We look at comparative data and we go, what went up, what went down. That's part of what's interesting, and the level of their. Sometimes it's interesting when things are staying relatively the same, when they're kind of plateauing. So let's go there.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that actually surprised me, and this is something to really talk about and lean into, was that the camper numbers for overnight summer camp have been relatively stagnant since 2022. And so we saw the post-pandemic bump, from 2020 to 2021 to 2022. It was sort of steadily increasing, and it was like, oh, we're on a great trajectory back towards pre-pandemic levels. And we've heard from a number of camp directors sort of anecdotally and from individual camps that, it's sort of plateaued. And we were still hearing a lot of reports of across the industry, numbers were rising. And we know that's the case across the entire camp industry, that numbers have been continuing to rise. But among our outdoor ministry connection ministries specifically, so these mainline Christian camps, we saw the trajectory go up from 2020 to 2022 and then level off. So 2023 and 2024 were not significantly different from the 2023 numbers that these camps were reporting. And that's a bit concerning, because the numbers are still well below 2020 or 2019 levels. So this is something that we want to keep an eye on and wonder about. Why are the numbers sort of leveling off? So to give you a sense, quite a few reported that their numbers were a little bit higher than the previous summer, but only about a third. So it was about a third reporting that their numbers were somewhat higher or much higher than the previous summer.
Okay.
Right around a third that said about the same, and right around a third that said they were a little lower. It was a few more said they were higher than said that they were lower. So you get a sense that, okay, there's more camps that are up than are down, but it's still a pretty flat trajectory from what we would expect. And then as they look at the past 5 years and those trends, they say, okay, it's still up compared to the last 5 years, because that includes the pandemic, but it has leveled off. And so that's one of those things where I was under the impression that because the whole industry was up, our Christian camps were also up. But we've sort of seen a different story. Some of the things that might be behind that. We know that there's been a lot of stress in some of our denominational bodies in the last few years, specifically in the United Methodist Church. That's one of our largest outdoor ministry connection members and affiliates. they've had some very challenging splits in their denomination. Some of the individual churches have left the denomination. That has put pressure on some of the camps as they try to figure this out and move forward. And so we can see that in their data specifically, and that affects everybody. It was also a national youth gathering year for the Lutherans, and we oftentimes see a little bit of dip in the youth gathering year with camper numbers. So those two things combined can explain a little bit why there wasn't a jump from 2023 to 2024.
It'll be interesting, of course. Right, it is. It'll be interesting to see, hopefully in a couple again, where that is, the levels are there, because coming out of the pandemic includes all these other factors, right? Like sports are back to full swing, and music, and other camps and all of these different things are back to full swing. They were coming through and coming out of the same kinds of things. And we know people's church affiliation, and as they reintegrated those pieces into their lives is not the same as it was pre-pandemic either. And so, there are a bunch of
things to remember here, though. It's not like some people are saying, oh, everybody's down. That's not the case, right? In general, the trend is stagnation over the last couple of years. So difficulty getting back to pre-pandemic levels across our mainline camping groups. Some of them are up. Some of them are up quite a bit. And so when we see these numbers, we know that there's different stories at different camps. So we've got, about 20% of the respondents saying that they're at their highest levels in the last 5 summers. And so 2024, that would include, all the way back to pre-pandemic. And so some of them are at nice high levels. Others are saying lower than most. So we've got about a quarter saying lower than most of the last 5 years. And so there's two narratives that are going on at the same time. Some camps are doing really, really well. Some camps are not doing well, and they're struggling. So it's a little shaky in the industry right now, is what we could say.
So when we think about that kind of camper participant numbers, there was some increase though in retreat numbers, right?
Yeah. So that's the other side of this, is like we see a bump towards getting closer to pre-pandemic levels in the retreat numbers. And so we ask, this isn't just a summer camp survey. We're asking about retreats and conferences as well. And so retreats and conferences were generally up. And so it was about 3/4 of camp and retreat ministries said that their retreat ministry numbers were up in 2024 compared with the previous year. So that is, by and large, the vast majority of them. Again, 75% are saying there's an increase. Another about 20% is saying that it's about the same. And so the trajectory is definitely up in terms of retreat participation. So that's an encouraging sign. It doesn't quite mitigate for everybody the drop in or the stagnation in summer camp numbers. We want to see those increase as well. But it is a positive sign from the retreat and conference side of things, for sure.
Yeah, that's helpful. All right, let's move. We saw in these results more in terms of fundraising. We've seen an increase in terms of fundraising. 48% of respondents indicated that their revenue from fundraising and donations in particular was higher than the previous fiscal year. So this is one we shared quickly as our stat of the week a couple weeks ago when we had Chad on. But worth unpacking for just a second here. Fundraising's up. These donations and dollars in giving is something that's increased. And 48% is not a small number, right? When you've got just shy of half saying donations and fundraising are up, that's a really positive, hopeful thing overall.
And most of the rest are saying it's about the same. That gives you a sense. Like most of the other, it's not like everybody else is down. It's not like half are up, half are down. Half are up. Another 37% are about the same, right? So very few were reporting that their fundraising revenue was down. Now, another way to unpack this is to look at, the different sizes of camps. And so the camps that are larger, that is their budgets are,
this is important,
a couple $1 million or more, or even over $1 million, kind of that middle category of camp. It's well over half of those have higher fundraising revenue. So especially the larger camps, the ones that have a budget over 2 million, some of them are over 5 million, of course. So on the larger side of these camps, that's 2/3 were reporting higher fundraising revenue. So 68% of those were reporting higher fundraising revenue, compared with less than 45% of those that had a budget of $500,000 or less, right? So the camps that are on the smaller side, they weren't reporting as much of the increase in revenue. So we know that those that have, again, more more staff, more capacity to get
dedicated
out there
year-round
and tell the
staff to those
story.
efforts. And
Those are the ones that are seeing a higher increase in fundraising, but we do see the increase across the board, even at the very small camps that have a budget of under $200,000 a year.
yeah, that's helpful. Quick reminder, everybody, that we're gonna with a bunch of these we have and we'll share some shareable things. We'll share some ourselves, and you can hit share. We'll give you some in kind of that in the stat of the week and things like that we'll do in a little bit. So you've got some ways that you can share this and bring this into your story, whether it's sharing externally or sharing with your folks internally. So 48% increase overall in fundraising.
So that's a cool increase. So we see some of these cool increases in terms of raw numbers, in retreats and in fundraising revenue. One area that we saw some decrease, and this is more of a philosophy piece. This is the faith emphasis piece. We've talked about this in the past. How much does camp emphasize faith? And I'll get this from directors. They'll have parents come to them and they'll ask things like, so how Jesus-y are you? Right? And they're struggling with how to answer that question. They're trying to be all things to all people. They don't want to be overbearing with the faith. But of course, here at Sacred Playgrounds, we really emphasize that camp needs to be faith-centered. That's one of the 5 fundamental characteristics of Christian summer camp. And so how much is faith at the center? How much of it is peripheral? How much of it is compartmentalized? And how much is faith incorporated into all aspects of what we do? And what we've seen philosophically among the large group of camp directors that we're looking at in Outdoor Ministries Connection is a steady decline in the number and percentage that are saying that faith is very or extremely important to their ministries. And so that's something that I see as concerning. That has declined alongside of this understanding that they have a strong connection to their congregational ministries, to their partner churches. So the partner church connections have been declining, and alongside that, in a parallel line, basically, the emphasis of faith has been declining. So just to give an idea of numbers, when we ask about how much do you emphasize faith, it's like low, moderately high, or very high. So in going back to 2016, we've asked that specific question. So for about 10 years, we've asked that question. And in 2016, over half of our responding directors said they have a very high faith emphasis, 55%.
Yeah, 55.
This was only 10 years ago, right? Or 9 years ago. This year now, at the beginning of 2025, 31% say they have a very high faith emphasis. It has declined steadily every year that we've done this survey. And again,
Drops
these are
5 points a year.
It's not just camp. This is camp and retreat ministry directors, right? But it's a large percentage drop from over half to fewer than a third saying they have a very high emphasis. Now quite a few are still saying we have a moderately high emphasis, right? It's not like they have no emphasis on faith. They're just less of a priority than it was when it kind of topped the list in 2016. We've even seen a reordering of the prioritization of these different things. I said at the beginning, safety is still number 1. Fellowship and community building is still number 2, right? Self-esteem and character building is still number 3. But number 4 used to be facilitating experiences of God. And remember, that was higher than fun. And we used to make a big deal of that. Well, those have switched in the last couple times we've done this survey. And so fun is usually prioritized ahead of experiences of God and faith formation for a lot of these camp directors. And so we see these shifts. And this shift includes pulling away from our partner churches a little bit, feeling less of a connection, feeling less of an emphasis on faith. And then we see over time what that means for things like camper recruitment and camper numbers and things like that when we get farther away from our mission and why we are doing what we're doing. How central should this be? And as ministries of the church, I strongly encourage you to keep faith at the center of what you do. Faith formation incorporated into all aspects of camp life. And to give you a sense of where that's at, that's a question that we ask every year, okay? And over 3/4 of directors still agreed with that statement. Faith formation and practices should be incorporated into all aspects of camp life. It was 76%, and that's the lowest that we've seen it in all the years that we've done this survey.
Yeah.
So we've seen kind of a steady decline in something like that. And we're going to keep preaching this because it's
That's
something that is a
interesting, of
priority
course.
to us. Go ahead.
Well, it's interesting because we ask parents that too. And one would assume that these leaders, these directors who knew exactly what they signed up for would place such a high emphasis on that. And so to see that steadily decreasing is interesting. It's interesting in light of a whole bunch of things like the mobility that you talked about and who are we hiring, and interesting in terms of, the clear, if we've got a leader saying that, that's trickling down to program and that's trickling down to other staff, undoubtedly. And so that's interesting.
And it's in response, I will say, a lot of times it's
Yeah.
in response to things that they're hearing from parents. But what I really want to emphasize with them is that you're hearing loud voices from parents. Are you surveying your parents? Are you really in front of them and understanding the high percentage of parents that want faith to be central? It might not be all of the parents that are sending kids to your camp, but it's the majority of parents. At almost every one of the camps that we've done these parent surveys, we ask this same question. And we see the vast majority of them agreeing with faith formation should be incorporated into all aspects of camp, and prioritizing my child growing in faith as a goal of camp over things like making friends and having fun, right? So we see that
Right.
a lot of times from parents. Like, this is still a top priority for a number of your parents. And the louder ones might get in your face and say, hey, why are you, emphasizing this so much? That doesn't mean it's the trend for all of the parents.
Mhm.
It's sometimes the louder ones that get our attention, and we don't
Yeah.
want to make drastic changes in our programs for the sake of those, because that waters down the program. And then the ones that are your biggest supporters, the ones that love your camp the most because of who you are and the mission and vision priorities of your camp, are saying, maybe I'm going to send my kid elsewhere. So there's consequences to shifting our values.
Yeah. Alongside, speaking of parents, because these are often, some loud voices here, one of the things that we have seen increase, that we have seen more of, is the cost to attend camp.
For sure.
Camp fees, the fees to come to camp, to families, or sometimes families in partnership with their churches. But, overall, this is a conversation in my house, right? We got 3 kiddos that we want to send to at least one camp this summer. And our church has a ton of fundraising, sometimes an overwhelming amount of fundraising opportunities, and you can't do them all. But we plain need it. We plain need it to be able to send all our kids to camp. And we, of course, believe in it and love it. And we couldn't do it without that fundraising and potentially campership things and all of that. Overall, across the board, the cost to attend camp is getting more and more expensive. And then there's some reasons. We'll get there in just a second. There are some reasons, for that potentially, and other cost related things that are there. But overall, camp's getting more expensive to attend for families.
Yes, and that impacts our camper numbers, and we need to know that, right? And so camp is still a value, obviously, and it's a deal. Like, the numbers that we see in terms of the average do not reflect the actual cost of camp. We know that. And parents, the same parents that were sending their kids 5 years ago, can see the percentage increase, can see that the average cost of camp has gone up over $100 per camper since 2020. I mean, that's huge increase. And it's hard if I've got multiple kids that I'm trying to send to camp. And so they see that, and that becomes more of a sticker shock. So to give you a sense of this, the average fee of summer camp rose 44% from 2014 to 2024. 44%. So it's almost a 50% increase, right? And I want to point out that the cumulative inflation over the course of that time, which most of the inflation took place between 2020 and 2022, we know that, right? Because inflation was high. But cumulatively, inflation was about 29% during that time. So the camp fee increased way more than the rate of inflation at our Outdoor Ministries Connection camps. That's something to think about. So, like, when parents are saying camp is really expensive, they're feeling it because it's going up high. They understand that different things are going up, and fees need to go up and things like that. But it's higher than all of these other things that are also going up, which puts more pressure on these families. And I know so many of our camps are doing a great job of giving scholarships and things like that. We got a high percentage that report that a bunch of their campers get scholarships. Some of them are trying to send all of their kids for free to camp. There's been some cool programs with that. So keep doing things like that, but also remember that sticker price can sometimes be a barrier to folks.
Yeah, the hard number, just the hard overall average, $551. US dollars, the average weekly camp fee in the US, 537 Canadian. There's a little bit of regionality to that. When you see this full report, when the whole thing comes out, you'll see some where things in the South and the Northeast are a little more expensive than the West in the US, the West and the Midwest in the US. So there's some regionality to it, which makes, of course, some sense.
Yeah. And there's a big swing in Canada. East-West Canada are very different. People know that culturally. But in terms of camp fees, it's a huge difference. East Canada, Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, that area,
Yeah.
$590 Canadian on average, and West Canada, $549 Canadian on average. So
49, right? Yeah.
I'm sorry, 449. Yeah.
Yeah.
449.
So
yeah,
whole,
big. It's a
what is that,
huge difference between West and East in those. And some of this has to do with amenities, right? Like, what is the camp providing? Camp numbers are going to fluctuate. There's some camps that are over $800 a week and things like that. We understand all that. What we're doing is we're taking these averages with the same camps, because these are all Outdoor Ministry Connection camps, over the course of several years, and trying to compare those things and then saying, why is this? A lot of our costs are going up. We know food costs have gone up. We're building more buildings. I mean, we have nicer accommodations. People are demanding nicer accommodations, right? Bathrooms in the cabin, air conditioning, temperature controlled spaces. So we're doing these things and we have nicer amenities, and it's still camp, from a parent's perspective. So it's hard when the numbers change like this. And so that's going to be one of the pieces that puts pressure on these camper numbers.
So one of the costs that is among the things that have gone up is the cost to employ our summer staff. So we'll share that, and we're even actually going to do that in our stat of the week.
Stat of the week. Stat of the week. Stat of the week.
All right, so the stat of the week this week, I'll intro it, and Jake, you can tell us more. The stat of the week is $348. This is in US dollars. $348 is the average weekly summer staff salary. So quickly, when you look at this report, eventually, one of the most interesting things to me is we have these graphs in there where we're layering camp costs and costs for summer staff to see the parallel between those. So there's just a little note, put a pin in it to look at that. So 348 in US dollars. Average weekly salary in Canada, 494 Canadian. So that is an increase, right, Jake?
Yes, that is a major increase. And so there's two things to go along with this, right? One, we celebrate that we're paying our staff more. Yay, us. That's something that we should feel good about, because we were underpaying our staff. So it's really exciting and a positive thing that we're starting to pay our staff more, because I want to say we were underpaying our staff, and while camper fees were going up, camp staff salaries were pretty stagnant. So they were actually below the rate of inflation for a long time. And so from when we started the survey in 2014 all the way through 2020, the staff salaries only increased 14% over that time. And then they took a huge jump from 2020 to 2024, a 37% increase. So if your budget is feeling it, that's probably why. There were all these pressures with the pandemic. You were trying to find staff. There was a lot of conversation among camp directors that our staff deserve it. We should be paying staff more. We've been, getting all that stuff out in front of people. That's great. And that's a big pressure on our budgets. And we understand that. So we can celebrate it and recognize that we've now committed to these higher salaries. And what does this mean? How do we fund it? They're worth it. We know that. These staff are worth it. So let's keep paying them and keep trying to increase that, but also recognizing that this is a challenge and a pressure on our budgets. And so working to fundraise those things and trying to mitigate those costs without passing all of it onto the parents of the campers.
We've got one more to share as we're getting close to wrapping here, Jake.
So this is an interesting one that I've experienced personally, but also it's great to see it borne out in the numbers, that the mainline camping industry is less dominated by old white guys, and it's really nice to see
say it like it is.
This decrease, because like when I got into the industry, I was a young white guy, right? But what I saw among the directors was kind of this old man's club. And they kind of had an old school way of doing things. They were friends. They'd all been doing it a long time, and they would clump off into their own area or own room, and they would talk shop among themselves. And I've seen that change a lot among the different associations that I've been involved with, in terms of what does the look of the people in the room, what is that? What do they look like? And what does it feel like when I'm there? Do I feel welcome? Do I feel included? Do other people feel included? Or is there only one or two women in the group, one or two people of color? I will say demographically, it's still very white in terms of camp directors.
Super
right?
white.
It's still 94% white, which is marginally better than when we started. But the number of female camp directors has increased every year that we've done this survey, and it was over 40% finally. So we finally are reaching towards parity between male and female directors. So it was at 43% of our responding camps had female directors. It was only at 26% in 2014. So we can see how much it's changed in just 10, 11 years. And it's really cool to see those changes, to see those faces when I go to these conferences, where the women don't feel like they're alone, or they have to break into this old man's group, but there's cohorts of female directors that are supporting one another, and talking through those things. There's mixed groups of male and female directors that are talking shop and sharing things together. So it just looks and feels differently. And I've really appreciated that in terms of the feel of these conferences, in terms of what are the things that we're celebrating, the values that we have, and the openness that these camps are and the directors are as a group. So it's not just, a glass ceiling where females can be on summer staff, they can be program directors maybe, but they can never get to that executive or CEO level. That has really changed. Now most of our camps have had female directors before, and it doesn't feel like as much of a barrier. And that's something that I wanted to lift up and say I think that's a very positive thing.
And I feel like we've seen the culture, maybe even of those who might fit in that, middle-aged to older white guy demographic in our point of view, in our connectivity, and who we seek out in things like recognition of some of those seasoned female leaders, right? We have in a bunch of those, these OMC associations, some incredible seasoned female leaders that are getting some really neat recognition and respect, whether that's awards that happened with our Episcopal friends last fall, some seasoned directors in LOM that are having some, incredible, they're getting near retirement or whatever it is, and recognition. So I feel like the culture change that has followed that demographic change is really positive.
It is.
That's good news.
It's now seeping into the whole network. And so it's not just the youngest directors are more likely to be female. There's more parity in the age groups. And so it's just wonderful to see the associations become more professional and diversify, at least gender-wise.
Yeah. All right, we did it. There's 7 with a lot of bonuses in between there of these things
that
have either with a lot of bonuses, so more less, or some things that have kind of stayed the same, and what's interesting about all those. So like we said, this particular report will be out soon, and you'll be able to see that. We'll make sure that's up. It'll be sacredplaygrounds.com/OMC Director, and you'll be able to find that. The 2022 data has been out there for a while now. You can go see that now, and then just stay tuned there. Our emails and things like that, we'll make sure to share some of that out in those spaces. You guys are getting awfully close here to another summer of ministry. So we've got just really an episode left and something special planned after that. But in a couple weeks, we're going to do our season 4 finale of the Sacred Playgrounds podcast. We'll give you a listening break for the summer. You can always, go back and listen through things as they come up. We've got another kind of article to publish in our regular podcast article every week kind of schedule, and then you're off and running for the summer. Between now and then, let us know how we can support you, especially in terms of your staff. Keep an eye out for our article next week. We're going to give you some kind of tips and things like that right as you're getting close here to the summer, along with some things, in our store and some of the different ways to engage that have got some kind of sales and extra things coming up. So that's our plan. Grateful for all of you. Thanks for your good work. Lots of prayers and blessings as you approach this summer. Thanks for listening to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast. The 2025 edition of Holy Ground is available in the Sacred Playgrounds store right now. This guide and devotional was written by camp staff for camp staff, with 12 fresh weeks of devotions for 2025, as well as updated front content and back content to support their journey all summer and beyond. if placing a resource in their hands is the best way to equip, encourage, and empower these important faith practices, then Holy Ground might be just right for you. Head to sacredplaygrounds.com/holyground and click the button to order your copies today. Thanks for listening to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/sacredplaygrounds or at sacredplaygrounds on Instagram. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you're getting this podcast. And if you like this content and it's helpful, you can support the podcast by clicking that support button. Our theme music was written and performed by Taylor Wilson. You can find all his original songs wherever you get your music. Learn more about what we're up to and connect with the team at sacredplaygrounds.com.